First of all, I would like to thank everybody for allowing us to have what we consider a global classroom.
Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salam ala rasulihil kareem wa alihi wa sahbihi wa man ittaba'u ila yawmiddin. The issue of hijrah has to be taken into context of the rest of the questions on the list. We can't isolate hijrah and then talking about integration and the ban of niqab, because they're tied, just like Abdus-salaam just stated. If a person can establish his deen, so if we're going to talk about hijrah, then we need to talk about the ban on the niqab. If we're going to talk about can a person establish his deen, integrating into what? Integrating until we become like Christians, where we have the name of Muslim, but we have the face of the kuffar. But at the same token, as Abu Osama said, we're not to take an extreme view and say, okay, everybody has to go, because then the issue comes from where are we going to go. As far as myself, I've lived the last 11 years in places like Mauritania and in different villages in Egypt. And so quality of life becomes an issue. And people, like Abu Osama said, 10, 15 years ago, we had a very strong idea. Let's go make hijrah. One of the things that happened to me when I took this mindset, my daughter died in Mauritania, one of my children, when I was living in the desert. And I'm not saying it's because of hijrah, but you have to be responsible as a father when you make these decisions to plan things out so that you can know. And there was no hospital in Mauritania, so I had to drive all the way to Senegal in order to get medical attention. And the drive is about almost 20 hours. It's a very long drive. So these things have to be taken into consideration. To live in these lands, I don't believe we can integrate when they're constantly telling us that we have to change in order to be like them. So we can't live here and let our children develop into something that is not Muslim. But at the same time, we have to be adult and mature enough to not sink into the thing called batar. Batar is one of the diseases of the heart, where a person willingly and lovingly goes into debt to maintain a standard of life that is outside of his means. We've become soft. We'd rather live closer to the water than further away, along with devil worshippers and homosexuals and all types of, deviant peoples, because the water is closer, and we're not man enough to go and find someplace else. The technological world in the West is run by immigrants. So then if we took that technology and went someplace else, in 10 years, that place would be the strongest country in the world. But there has to be some people that plan it out, go and make those steps. Look at Somalia, northern Somalia today. Look how great strides they're making in little less than 10 years. So it's not out of the question, but it has to take some planning. It's not for everybody all at once. Young men have to get skills. You just can't go there when you've been working at McDonald's or these types of jobs. You have to have real life skills so you can do something. There has to be some mindset, and you have to be willing to give something if you plan on getting something. Walillahil hamd. As for the hadith, he stated, there's no hijrah from Mecca to Medina. So that hijrah is ended, not hijrah until from the land of the kuffar into the land of the Muslims. And not to go against Abu Osama, barakallah fihim, he was one of the last persons that I spoke to before I left the country. In fact, those years ago, we were in Texas. But there is a hadith that tells us that we shouldn't live with the kuffar, and it deals with bara. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, Ana bari'un, I'm free from everybody who dies in these lands, and that we shouldn't see each other's fires. So that's either we're going to take that as wajib or we're going to take that as mustahab. I guess it's an argument that can be clarified. I don't necessarily know how some people take it, but it's a high encouragement for us to look for another way to establish our lives and not be willing to give up our children to the kuffar. Just like that. MashaAllah. Like I said, you know, hijrah is, or like Saeed said, hijrah has a beautiful side, you know. And hijrah has a side that makes you have to be mature. Going to a country that is poor is not going to cause an imbalance if you have some skill. Rather, that skill is going to enhance that country. 1 second. Most of the people that, you know, if you do your due diligence, you will note that the majority of the people that are going back to Somalia have skills. The things that they're shipping back and forth to Somalia, as far as like medical, not just supplies, equipment, these need technicians to go back and use that. Someone with some skills goes to that area, you create jobs. There's opportunity in that. Nowhere in Africa in reality is a poor country. But the reality is that because of people stealing and corruption, and also not just inside corruption, outside corruption, there's processes that are negating the establishment of an Islamic society from the grassroots. But what happens when people with British passports or American passports who are American citizens go to those places, all you need to do is look at what they call Israel today. And then that makes it a different whole scene. When you're over there, now that's American citizens. Those are British citizens. You marry and, you know, normally we have at least 10 children or something like that. You know, now those children are American citizens or British citizens or, you know, born out of the country, but they're still citizens. You know, that changes the whole dynamic of the country. Work, you know, freedom ain't free. You know, and that's what the real deal is, at least in my estimation. Everybody, and especially the under 30 group, you know, I can't say especially anyone, because we have it on both sides. Everybody's comfortable getting fat, and no one wants to be a man. If you made hijrah in the time of the Prophet, you walked into a war zone. There wasn't 4 months where they weren't fighting. So you can't use the excuse they're fighting. Even if you were to go over there and they were fighting, at least you fight in jihad. We talk that talk. We like the appearance of deen. We like to go buy the clean thobe, shave the head so we look like we're coming from Umrah or Hajj. We like this appearance, but the work is work. And we benefit from these lands. That's what I see. Now, there's a reason to come to the land of the kuffar if you need something. And as soon as your need is finished, you should save yourself and your children. Like he said, I lived in Mauritania about 6 years and then about 5 years in Egypt. My 3 oldest daughters are Hafiz Quran. The other ones that are raising in America, it's hard enough to keep them speaking Arabic. And it's not because they're bad children. It's because the environment is not conducive for Islam. Not conducive. So there are other things that are happening to the children. And if you try to establish it, what happens in this society? If your wife doesn't like you, she calls the boss. She doesn't have to listen to you. They'll come and take their children and do what they want. So we have to look at this thing from a realistic, and then we have to look at our children. What would you rather have? A child that understands more about his deen and can recite the Quran, or a child that's soft, mudallal, spoiled? He's waiting for you to die so he can inherit. He wants you to get your butt up and get to work so he can buy me some new clothes. And where's my Xbox? And you better be nice to me or I'll tell the teacher. Right? So, I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to, it's like the brother said too, you know, hijrah can take many different forms. It might be wajib for some, but is that you? And is it the state that you can't make hijrah? And if we're really honest with ourselves, the quality of life in these countries ain't that great. You know, if you came for medical treatment or you're seeking asylum, you know, alhamdulillah, you live and you learn. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. The thing that he mentioned earlier about, you know, immigrant Muslims in their presence and seeing revert Muslims, revert brothers coming back, I don't necessarily see that as true, because, you know, being a revert Muslim myself, I didn't revert because of immigrant Muslims' da'wah, you know. And I mean, maybe times have changed, but I haven't seen a whole bunch of revert Muslims out giving da'wah, you know, and Allah knows best. The thing that I do see is that it's true. Some of the people who are doing da'wah, they need to be in place and make da'wah. But that's a special case person. That's not, you know, the majority of people in the room. You know, the majority of people in the room are immigrant Muslims for the most part. And so they have to look at the situation from their standpoint. As for the other statement he made about Islam, politics, or going to the land of the Muslims and living in peace, you know, like we said, you know, freedom is not free. Work is going to be work. No one said Islam is peace, that you're going to just go live happily ever after. That's a fairy tale. You know, the life is going to be, you know, work until the day we die, and then we meet Munkar and Nakir, and then there's questions. And Islam is politics. You're making a political statement by dressing the way you are, by praying 5 times a day, just by saying La ilaha illallah. That's a political statement. You know, and so, you know, when we say Islam is not politics, I don't know what context that's meant for. Maybe somebody does, but everything you do is a political statement. And it's just like he said, there is an agenda. Today it's the niqab, tomorrow it's the hijab, the next day it's the beard, then it's the thobe, then it's the statement. You know, if we look at history, and eventually, you know, we're going to have to do something, but like Abdus-salaam said, there has to be a balance. But we can't be so filled belly, so lazy. Abu Batna, everybody's so, you know, full. Really, I mean, let's be real with ourselves. Most of us are political punks. We're not going to do nothing, not going to bust a grape in a fruit fight. You know, and they're happy about that. You know, and they're happy about, but look what you're doing. Look at the example that we're setting for our children. You know, we shouldn't be so hesitant, so scared. We're scared of our wives. You know, we talk about polygamy, you know. You guys don't get it. Subhanakallah. May Allah give us, you know, more strength to establish the deen. You know. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. I'm not, you know. Only thing I would say to the closing advice, Jazakumullah khair. Practice your Islam the best that you can. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَسْتَطَعْتُمْ. Fear Allah as much as you can. And you and Allah know best about what your particular situation is. Just be honest with yourself and do the best you can to be. I'm not like Saeed. Saeed says, you know, be nice and everything. If I wake up in the morning and I don't feel like being nice, I might not be nice. Be you. Let them see that Muslims are people. Don't even be subconscious about it. Don't even worry about it. Just do you. Do what you have to do and don't look sideways. That's what my advice is, you know?
First of all, I would like to thank everybody for allowing us to have what we consider a global classroom.
وجب الشكر علينا متى